You have never taken any performance-enhancing drug in connection with your cycling career?
Correct.
Some breaking news now on Lance Armstrong. The global governing body of cycling has just announced moments ago it will ban Armstrong for life and strip him of his 7 tour titles.
The reason why it was regarded as the Tour de Force was because everywhere French customs or French police looked, they found drugs.
As his reputation, sponsorships, and influence have fallen off a cliff, the silence surrounding his methods over the years has begun to crack. A former competitor testified in this deposition that Armstrong bribed him to throw a race with $1 million prize.
What was the offer?
If my memory serves me right, I think it was $50,000.
Is it fair to say that you were offered money to not challenge Mr. Armstrong to allow him to win?
That's correct.
Lance was a huge bully, and I think the bullying was worse than the doping.
How could it have taken place when I've never taken performance-enhancing drugs?
Okay.
How could that have happened?
That was my point. It's not just simply you don't recall, just...
How many times do I have to say it?
I'm just trying to make sure your testimony is clear.
Well, if it can't be any clearer than I've never taken drugs, then incidents like that could never have happened.
Okay.
How clear is that?
The disgraced cyclist Lance Armstrong has ended years of denial by admitting using performance-enhancing drugs.
I'd like you to walk me through it. Were there, pill deliveries and blood in secret refrigerators? How did it work?
Oh, we need a long time. I view this situation as one big lie that I repeated a lot of times. If you take me back to 1995, when it was completely and totally pervasive, I'd probably do it again.
Disgraced former cyclist Lance Armstrong is a bully, a stain on an entire industry and the integrity of sports, a prolific liar. Armstrong doped continuously, and it led to him winning the Tour de France 7 times.
Today, the agency known as USADA issued a long report featuring sworn testimony from 11 of Armstrong's former teammates. It found there's conclusive and undeniable proof that Armstrong doped throughout the majority of his professional career through a massive doping scheme.
And yet Armstrong, a prolific scammer, has decided to weigh in on an issue Republicans love clinging towards as a distraction for votes: trans people playing sports. Armstrong set up a camera crew to follow him on his way to see a certain conservative that has turned her back on those who simply wish to exist and make friends through sport, failed gubernatorial candidate that received 1% of the vote in Gavin Newsom's recall effort, a speaker at CPAC, Caitlyn Jenner. Jenner has even admitted inadvertently that she seems puzzled why the GOP continues flocking to her and placing her in front of a microphone to speak out on trans inclusion in sports. Oddly enough, in Armstrong's video, he puts Malibu, California on the screen at the beginning. When running for governor, Jenner said this. She gave the "I gotta get out of California" line, yet clearly hasn't moved. Armstrong would tease his project by writing the following: "Have we really come to a time and place where spirited debate is not only frowned upon but feared? Where people's greatest concern is being fired, shamed, or canceled? As someone all too familiar with this phenomenon, I feel I'm uniquely positioned to have these conversations." A few things wrong with this, so let's jump into it. First, throwing around the word canceled so freely is simply a bullhorn to all who align with Republican politics and ideologies, as the GOP held literal hearings on cancel culture instead of, things that actually matter. Second, to say you're having a debate with someone like Caitlyn Jenner on the topic of trans people in sports is like, Fox News going to Jason Whitlock.
5 cops felt that they had the ability to beat a man to death with impunity. They really thought there would be no consequences for it.
Looked like gang violence to me. It looked like what young black men do when they're supervised by a single black woman. And that's what they got going on in the Memphis Police Department. They've elected or put some black woman in charge of the police force. And we're getting the same kind of chaos and disunity and violence that we see in a lot of these cities that are run by single mothers.
Armstrong knows exactly what he's doing, but he's also placating himself to the people he wants to be surrounded with. As Patrick Redford wrote for Defector, the debate about whether to allow trans people to compete alongside their cisgender counterparts is about restricting trans rights. To frame it as a question of sporting integrity would be deeply cynical, even if a notorious cheater weren't the one making it. With cycling season heating up and the Tour de France set for July, this is purely strategic from Lance Armstrong. Deadspin notes Armstrong has never made news standing up for female competitors or women in sports. However, with the rather ease one can become synonymous with right-wing ideologies and gain notoriety in those circles, Armstrong is dutifully serving to get in said circles. But it's also worth noting just how prolific of a cheater he was. He not only pumped himself with EPO and took illegal blood transfusions, but he also ran a sophisticated team-wide operation. Teammates were intimidated if they didn't comply. He tried to destroy anyone who flipped on him. He threatened Levi Leipheimer's wife, texting her, "Run, don't walk," after Levi testified against him. When massage therapist Emma O'Reilly testified she once applied makeup to Armstrong to cover up a needle mark, he publicly defamed her as an alcoholic who slept her way to the top of the sport. He's since expressed regret for that, calling himself an idiot. Journalists who publicly asked questions about doping were targeted by him. He often went above their heads to try and get him fired. This guy defending the concept of fairness is like Dracula making the case for veganism.